Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. I was in our bedroom folding tomorrow's work shirts when it happened. My name is Caleb Ward. I'm 38, a construction foreman in Nashville. The house was quiet except for the old AC humming against the late summer heat. I set the shirts on the chair, washed the concrete dust from my hands, and slid into bed beside my wife like I'd done 1,000 nights before. I reached for her shoulder. Nothing grand, just the kind of familiar touch that says I'm here. She stiffened, pushed my hand away, and said it like she'd rehearsed it. "Not with you." I didn't get loud. I watched her face in the glow of her phone and asked the only question a man asks when he's done pretending not to understand. "Who with? Do you have someone?" Something flickered across her eyes. Guilt, fear, or maybe anger at getting cornered with a simple sentence. Then the shutters dropped, and the smirk took its place. "Don't be dramatic," she said, rolling onto her side. The phone lit her cheekbone blue. The screen faced away from me. It always did lately. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling fan, counting the slow turns like they were seconds of my patience. You don't need to be a detective to read a woman you've shared a house and bed and grocery bills with. Tone changes. The vanish of easy laughter. A private ocean rising behind her eyes. The last few months had felt like a room rearranged when I wasn't home. Everything familiar, nothing where it belonged. I got up and went to the kitchen. The tile was cool under my feet. I poured water, leaned on the counter, and listened to the quiet thrum of the fridge. Working job sites teaches you about silence. Sometimes it means peace. Sometimes it's the air right before the beam comes down. In that soft night, her "don't be dramatic" echoed louder than any jackhammer. I emptied the glass and looked around the kitchen we'd remodeled together 2 summers ago, when overtime was good and weekends felt like hours. I remembered measuring the island twice, cutting once, telling her we'd cook more if the space made it easy. We did, for a while. Her music, my knife work, our plates. Later, we ate over the sink, scrolling on separate screens. You don't notice the day you stop playing your playlist. You notice when hers stops, and the silence keeps going. I'm not a man who chases. Foremen don't do begging on a site or at home. When a crewman hides behind excuses, you notice. You give clear direction once. If he keeps hiding, you move him off the line and the work keeps moving. Marriage isn't a job site, but respect is respect. I walked back to the bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching the small rise and fall of her shoulders under the sheet. What I felt was a layout in my head. Measurements, straight lines, a path from here to there without wasted steps. She pretended to sleep. The phone screen went dark, then bright, then dark again. Notifications. I could have pushed it. Could have asked my question a second time, a third. "Who with? Do you have someone?" But repeating yourself is what men do when they're trying to talk themselves into being heard. I'd been on the other side of noise enough to know it never builds anything. So I turned off the lamp, lay down on my back, and let the AC cover our silence. Morning came the same as always. My alarm, her shower, our calendar hanging crooked by the pantry door. She asked if I could pick up dry cleaning on my way back from the site. I said sure. We moved through the kitchen like co-workers on a deadline. I could smell her perfume, lighter than usual, new. She kissed the air near my cheek, not quite touching. "Late meeting," she said, eyes on her phone. "Don't wait up." I nodded and slipped on my boots. At the site, the sun came up behind the cranes and turned the steel orange. The men gathered with coffee and old jokes, and I ran the safety brief like I always do: weather, materials, who's on which beam. My hands knew where to point. My voice knew what to say. But behind the words, the question I'd asked the night before kept standing where I'd left it, unblinking. "Who with?" I didn't need the answer to know what I'd heard. A promise had shifted in my house. Not broken with a bang. Tilted, the way a load tilts when someone moves their weight and doesn't tell you. You feel it before you see it. You step back. I didn't tell anyone. Men on a crew see weakness and worry mix in a foreman's tone, and they'll start tripping over their own boots. The thing about being the one who holds the plan in his head is you learn to carry it quietly. The plan changes at noon. The work keeps moving by 1. At lunch, I sat on the bumper of the truck and ate the ham sandwich I'd thrown together without thinking. The sky was clean, bright, careless. I checked the weather for storms. I checked the invoice for a late pallet. I checked myself for panic and found none. On the drive home, traffic piled up by the river. I took the side streets through neighborhoods that had grown around old houses like vines around a beam. I passed the first apartment I rented in my 20s, the shop where I bought my first real tool belt, the church where my sister got married. It struck me that every important thing in my life had been built slow, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, trust by trust. You don't throw a sledge at a wall if a pry bar will do. But you don't keep prying when the studs are rotten. You mark the cut and plan the demo. Back at the house, the mail was a stack of ads and one bill with my name. Her car wasn't in the driveway. The living room smelled faintly like her perfume, like she'd left it there deliberately, the way people spray a room before company to prove the place is lived in. I put the mail on the counter and straightened the crooked calendar. I could have checked her drawer, checked her bag, checked her phone. I didn't. I wanted my feet under me, not my hands in her things. I showered, changed into a clean shirt, and made coffee I didn't need. The house darkened toward evening, and I left the lights off, let the street lamp paint lines on the floor. I thought about the first years, when we couldn't keep our hands off each other, when the bed felt like a place we ran to, not a place to defend. I thought about the middle years, when we learned each other's moods and calendars and how to apologize without using the word sorry. I thought about the last stretch, when she laughed less and planned more and started speaking to me like I was a guest who stayed too long. None of that needed a speech. It needed a line. She'd drawn hers in a sentence. I'd drawn mine in a question. It was enough for now. When she came home, the door clicked soft. Keys in the bowl, heels on the mat, the small pause of someone composing their face. I met her in the hallway. We looked at each other like two people reading signs on a road that used to only go one way. "You're up," she said. "I am. Long day. Not longer than usual." She waited for me to bring up last night, the way women wait for a man to use too many words, then hang him on one. I handed her the dry cleaning and watched the relief slide across her shoulders like a coat. She turned to hang it in the closet, and I saw the new dress, the tag still on. A color she never wore for me. We brushed teeth in silence. She slid into bed, phone in hand, screen a small moon. I set my alarm, turned off the lamp, and lay on my back again. The AC hummed. The fan turned. Somewhere in the house a pipe clinked as it cooled. I thought about the job site, about how you don't shout when a beam shifts. You signal, you brace, you clear the area, and you change the plan. You don't rush. You also don't ignore what the metal is telling you. Last night, my marriage had spoken in a clean, hard sentence. Tonight, I answered with one of my own, and I didn't need to repeat it. Who with? Do you have someone? She never said no. She never said yes. She let silence speak for her. I let it speak for me. The next week didn't explode. It settled. That's how real shifts happen, quiet. Each night I came home, the house looked the same, but the air had a tilt I could feel in my teeth. The refusals changed shape. They stopped being a sentence and started being a language. Tuesday, when I brushed her hair back and kissed her temple, she laughed through her nose and said, "Caleb, try to take a hint." Wednesday, I reached for her waist while she was packing a gym bag, and she flicked my hand away with 2 fingers, the way you brush off a thread. Thursday night, she climbed into bed with moisturizer that smelled like citrus and rules. I touched her shoulder. "I'd rather sleep than deal with that," she said, eyes on her phone, scrolling like she was late for an appointment with the bottom of a feed. Friday, I tried a different lane. We were both in the kitchen, and I came up behind her, hands around her hips, not needy, just mine. She stiffened, slid to the side, and opened a cabinet. "I have to be up early," she said to the plates. Translation, schedule Outrank's husband. It wasn't just nights. The tone carried into daylight. She started dressing sharper to run errands. New jeans, a pair of boots I hadn't seen the receipt for, lipstick at 10 a.m. for the farmer's market across town. The phone stayed face down on every surface. Notifications came in clusters, and she guarded them with her elbow, as if sunlight might steal the letters. I didn't ask. I had already asked the only question that mattered. Her silence had done the math. There was nothing left to calculate. Sunday we had brunch with friends. The place was loud with clatter and music from the 90s, all happy nostalgia and syrup. The wives compared Pilates studios. The husbands compared tool brands like we were negotiating an arms treaty. When I spoke about a crane maintenance delay, she cut across me with a smile that showed teeth and said, "You know Caleb, married to the job." The table laughed politely. At least the job talks back, she added, eyes on her mimosa. A small thing, said in public. But public things are placed on purpose. I let it sit. If you argue with a joke, you prove the punchline. That afternoon, she posted a photo of a latte swirl with a caption about choosing yourself. Comments from her circle stacked up like bricks. Love this, queen, preach. I read none of it and put my phone face down the way she does. Respect is not a group activity, and my opinion doesn't need an audience. At the site, I found myself noticing the men's hands more than their words. Calluses tell the truth. So does effort. We had a delivery window tighten, and I rerouted crews without raising my voice. The way you move chess pieces when the board hasn't realized the end is near. That's how I started moving at home, too. I took the extra key off her ring because we were down to one functioning lock, and safety is not sentimental. I set a new passcode on the garage keypad because we'd had porch pirates last month. I booked an oil change for my truck and scheduled it for a Saturday she was out, so I'd be nowhere anyone expected me for an hour. People think power is noise. Sometimes it's a calendar. The refusals kept rotating styles like outfits. Not now, with a sigh. I'm not in the mood for married duty, with a smirk. Can we not make everything about intimacy, with a lecture tone, as if I'd wheeled a whiteboard into the room? We can cuddle, she offered once, like a charity blanket handed out after a storm. I said, I'm good, and meant it. I'm not a man who takes coupons for what he used to own free and clear. I watch myself, too. That's important. Men forget to do that and become something they don't respect. I made dinner twice and ate it at the table with a book open beside my plate. I washed my tools, wiped them with oil, and lined them in the box until the socket smiled in size order. A foreman's comm isn't a mood, it's maintenance. One night, she decided to test the border of humiliation and curiosity. I reached for her, and she said, light and sing-song, why don't you go find someone else if you're that desperate? It was bait tossed into water to see what surfaces. I pictured a hook in a hand and a grin waiting at the end of the line. I didn't bite. I'm not desperate, I said. I'm married. She laughed like that was quaint, the way people laugh at a town with one stoplight. I rolled onto my back and looked at the ceiling fan. When it's time to move a load, the sign isn't the noise. It's the sway. Her schedule stretched later. Strategy meeting, she'd say, already wearing the perfume that only appears at night. We're networking, she'd add, and though we never had names. Sometimes she came home with the same perfume, muted by the smell of someone else's detergent. Sometimes she came home smelling like our own house, which felt like a rehearsal for innocence. I took showers before bed and slept dead center on the mattress, not on my side. You don't leave grooves for ghosts. Twice, she tried a sweetness that tasted like a test. She slid close and put her head on my shoulder without being asked, like a woman in a commercial for mortgages. I let her. When I moved my hand an inch, she froze, then groaned. Can't we just be close without you turning it into a thing? The answer was yes. We had been close without anything for months, and that's exactly why we weren't. I said nothing. Silence is a mirror. Eventually, people look up and see themselves. When I did speak, I kept it simple. One night, after she waved my hand away like a fly, I said, You sure this is how you want to talk to your husband? No edge, just the straight line. She stared like I'd broken a rule she'd written privately. You're so sensitive lately, she said. Sensitive is what people call men right before they test, if he's still listening. I was. I'll admit I took inventory. Not of her texts or her routes, but of the things that are mine to count. Savings. Truck title. The tools I bought twice so I could keep one set at the site and one set at home. A spare set of work clothes in the back of the cab. It wasn't a plan to leave. It was a plan not to be trapped by a situation that depended on me melting into it. A man can endure a lot on purpose. Endurance without purpose is surrender. The last small straw before the big one wasn't dramatic. We were watching some show that pretends to be about cooking but is really about people crying on schedule. She curled feet under herself, scrolled her phone, and said, We should be more like them, best friends. I said, Best friends don't ration each other. She shrugged, eyes on the bright rectangle. Physical stuff is overrated, she said. It just makes men clingy. I looked at the TV. Someone was frosting a cake with steady hands. I thought about how a good finish hides everything beneath it. Gaps, shortcuts, mistakes. A pretty top doesn't mean a level base. By then, the tally in my head wasn't numbers, it was tone. A flick of fingers. A rolled eye. A sentence shaped to bruise without leaving a mark. Not with you had grown up into a system. And systems either get corrected or replaced. I didn't feel urgency. When you finally draw the clean line through a mess, you don't rush the cut. You mark it twice. You brace the far end. You make sure the fall won't take out something worth keeping. So I kept working. I kept my voice even at the site and at the table. I touched her less, asked nothing twice, let my first question remain my last. Who with? Do you have someone? The absence of an answer thickened like poured concrete. It was curing into something I could stand on. And in that slow cure, the routine did what routines do. It revealed the real structure. I saw my house, my marriage, my role. I didn't hate her. I just stopped volunteering to be the kindling. I went to sleep the night before the end feeling rested for the first time in months. The marble in the room had finished rolling. It had found the low point. All that was left was to pick it up and move it somewhere level. The night it broke didn't arrive with thunder. I showered, put my wallet and keys on the dresser, and lay down on my back. No speeches rehearsed. If a structure is already failing, the last hit is just gravity doing what it always promised. She slid into bed late, hair still damp from a shower she took after being out. Citrus and rules again. The phone glowed in her palm, then dimmed. I turned my head and studied her profile to confirm what I already knew had moved in behind the eyes. I reached for her, not tentatively, palm open, fingers at her hip, the way a husband reaches for his wife because that's what the word means. She didn't flinch this time. She smirked. Go find someone else if you're that desperate. It wasn't a refusal, it was a dare. The kind of line you throw across a gap to see if the other side will catch it. I sat up, swung my legs to the floor, and felt the boards give the slightest creak under my heels. Good, I said, voice even. Then this is the last night under one roof. The smirk vanished so fast you'd think a switch had been flipped. Her chin jerked up like she'd been tapped. The phone went dark in her hand. You're kidding, she said, hunting for the smirk again and not finding it. Caleb, stop. I stood, walked to the closet, pulled the small duffel I keep for work travel, and set it on the chair. Socks, shirts, jeans, work pants, a clean pair of boots I'd broken in but not abused. Toothbrush, razor. The motions felt like counting, 1, 2, 3. She sat up in bed, sheet to her chest, eyes bright with a fear that hadn't visited in a long time. It was about losing the set she'd built, the lines, the cues, the stage marks where my feet were supposed to land. You're not actually doing this, she said. Can we talk like adults? We are. I folded a shirt once, twice, pressed it flat with my palm. You've been talking for weeks. That's ridiculous. Her voice stretched for casual and snapped. You're overreacting to nothing. I zipped the side pocket halfway. You remember the night I asked you a question? I didn't raise my head. Who with? Do you have someone? I let the words sit between us, same weight, same shape. The silence I'd come to trust returned, heavy and honest. She swallowed, stared at the footboard like there might be a prompt card there. This is insane, she said finally. You're throwing our marriage away because I don't want to, because I'm tired sometimes? Tired people don't smirk, I said. Tired people say so, and I listen. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. Bare feet, perfect nails, the small details you notice when you build anything worth looking at. Tears reached her eyes, gathered, held. When she spoke again, the sharp edges were gone. Wait, just wait. A single tear rolled. I watched it without pulling, without offering a tissue to negotiate away what it meant. I can explain, she tried. You had weeks, I said. You explained every night. That's not fair. Fair is for games, I said. We built a house. I set the bag on the floor to make room for the hard case that holds my levels and small driver set, tools I trust like old friends. Because men who leave without their tools plan on coming home to get them. I was done planning to come home. Where are you even going? The question sounded like logistics. It was inventory. She needed to know what she still had. A month to month across town, I said. Deposits paid. Door codes waiting. I didn't add that I'd found it days ago when the marble in the room wouldn't stop rolling. She didn't need my timeline to validate the decision. Her tears broke then, not dramatic, steady, the kind that ruins mascara and hope at the same pace. So that's it, she whispered. After everything? This is the cleanest thing I've done in a long time, I said. I walked to the dresser, took off my ring, and set it on the wood. No speech to accompany it. She moved closer, a hand hovering near my forearm like she might grip and shake me back into the script. Don't do this, she said. Please. I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean. You said them correctly, I answered. Clear diction. Good posture. I looked at her then. Really looked. Past the damp hair and the trembling mouth to the place where a person decides who they are going to be in your life. You weren't confused, I said. You were comfortable. The room narrowed to the space between us. The house held its breath. I crouched, zipped the duffel, and stood with it in my hand. The weight wasn't much. I've carried heavier for pay and less for pride. Before I turned toward the door, I put both feet flat on the floor and made sure I felt the ground. Then I spoke the last thing that needed saying. If there's a version of this where respect comes back, it won't arrive while I'm sleeping next to contempt. She flinched like I'd said a slur. You're twisting everything, she said, voice climbing. You always do this when you don't get your way. I shrugged into a jacket, even though the night was warm. When I don't get my way, I said, I go to work. I walked to the kitchen, flipped on the light, and found a pen. A sticky note, the color of caution tape, sat by the calendar. I wrote 3 lines. I'll send a list tomorrow. Utilities, mortgage, insurance. We'll split everything fairly until it's not ours to split. I signed my name because that's what you do when you mean something. I left the note under the magnet shaped like a tiny hammer she bought me once. Gifts, like jokes, tell you who people thought you were at the time. She followed me down the hall, bare feet on wood, tears drying in uneven tracks. You can't walk out with a note, she said, anger trying to lace up over panic. Talk to me. I have, I said. You preferred the smirk. I pointed at the sticky square. This is the adult part. This is punishment, she said. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm leaving. Punishment is what people do when they want to stay and make you pay rent in regret. Leaving is what men do when the lease is up and the foundation's cracked. At the front closet, I reached for the shelf and took down the spare set of truck keys I'd hung there out of habit, back when we still borrowed each other's time. She watched my hand, maybe expecting me to toss them back, to perform some last-minute surrender that would let her return to her role. I opened the door. Warm night slid in around my ankles. The grass smelled faintly of water and dust. I set the duffel just outside, the way you stage a load before the lift so you don't trip on the threshold. She leaned against the hallway wall, arms wrapped around herself like a borrowed coat. The tears were back, fresh and shiny. Caleb, she said, softer now. Please. I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw the old map. How we met, what we built, the first time we painted this trim in a color we both liked. I respected that map. I also respected the sinkhole no one patched because admitting it would have meant closing the road. You made your choice out loud, I said. I'm making mine with my feet. You won't answer my texts, she said, a small attempt at leverage. You're probably right, I said. But send them anyway if you need to say something for yourself. I touched the door with my fingertips, not dramatic, just to feel the wood I'd sanded last fall, the straight grain under a coat of stain that turned out better than I expected. Then I let it swing half closed and looked back one more time. I asked you a question, I said. Who with? Do you have someone? The tear at the corner of her mouth trembled. She opened it to speak and closed it again. Silence returned, true and heavy and clean. I nodded. That's still your answer, I said. This is mine. Morning landed quietly, like the house was holding its breath to see if I'd flinch. I packed the last of my essentials into the duffel I'd staged in the hall closet weeks ago. Passport, birth certificate, spare keys, the drawer safe with my grandfather's watch. I left her the master and took the guest room overnight because I'd said, last night under one roof, and I meant it. At 8 a.m., the lease for a short-term apartment went from tentative to signed. Movers were booked for the small stuff. A storage unit was already reserved. Before coffee, I sent 3 calm messages that mattered. One to the bank to convert our joint card to cardholder only for me and to freeze new charges until counsel reviewed the ledger. One to a family attorney a friend recommended. Consultation confirmed for Friday. One to my boss letting him know I'd be working remote for the next few days while I relocated. File access and deliverables unchanged. Her first text arrived at 9:14. We need to talk. Then a second. You're not seriously doing this. I replied once. We started last night. I'll be civil and precise. Email only. She called anyway. I let it ring. The tone of the voicemail slid from anger to breathless panic in a minute and a half. It wasn't "I love you." It was "Don't do this to us." I poured the coffee and let the message sit there like a museum piece. Exhibit A. The emotion that appears when comfort disappears. By lunch, the practical consequences hit her. A declined purchase alert pinged my phone. A boutique we both knew. 2 minutes later, "Why is my card not working?" I typed the line I'd rehearsed in my head for weeks. During separation, shared resources become points of friction. This is not punishment. No insults. Just a boundary in a complete sentence. She answered with something jagged and loud, then another voicemail with tears in it. I sat at the kitchen table and read through my attorney's intake questionnaire. Each box, I checked another quiet step out of the fog. Around 2, our doorbell rang with that fast, repetitive press that means someone wants a scene. I opened it to find her, makeup smudged, apology already forming and failing in her eyes. She stepped in like she still owned the air. "Can we please be adults?" I wasn't thinking. Last night was a mistake. I let the silence breathe. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, and somehow more dangerous, because desperation can pretend to be love if you're not paying attention. "It's not a mistake," I said evenly. "It's information. We act on information." That landed. She tried again. "Fine. Counseling, then. We'll do counseling. But I'm not changing who I am just because you're intense." There it was, the bargain with a barb in its tail. I shook my head. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm refusing to be diminished." The tears started for real then. Hands up, palms out, the surrender pose that isn't surrender. I stepped back and pointed to the laptop on the dining table. Anything further, put it in writing. The apartment keys were in my pocket by early evening. A rectangle of independence on a ring. I carried 2 boxes down and set them in the trunk while a neighbor I barely knew nodded like he'd been waiting for this, like the whole building had been listening to our quiet collapse for months. Back upstairs, she was in the kitchen. She'd cooked. Wine open. Candle lit. A dress she bought for anniversaries she later forgot. I took in the scene and felt nothing but the weight of a choice finally honored. "You win," she said, voice shredded. I shook my head. "There's nothing to win." She stepped closer. "Kiss me then. If you still just kiss me." The old me would have buckled. The man I was now kept his voice level. "We don't fix disrespect with dopamine." That sentence didn't come from spite. She followed me down the hall. Pleading turned to anger, anger back to pleading. "Everything but responsibility. You're throwing away years," she said. "No," I answered, lifting the first box. "I'm refusing to throw away more." On the walk out, she tried one last card, the cruelest one. "There isn't anyone else, you know." I paused in the doorway. "That was your moment to say it last night. I asked you who with, and you had silence." I made my decision in that silence. She sat down hard, like a wind had passed through her. Maybe it had. At the new place, I set the boxes on the floor and stood in the simple quiet. The windows weren't great and the paint needed a second coat, but the air wasn't negotiating with me. I made a bed with new sheets, unrolled a rug, put the watch and the documents in the tiny safe I'd brought. My phone lit the room with a stack of unread messages. I scrolled without opening. Blame, bargaining, sugar, fire. Then a photo from an unknown number. Him, apparently, or someone like him, a man with a face built for vanishing. The caption, "Lose my number." Maybe he sent it to her. Maybe she forwarded it to me by accident or design. I didn't need the twist to justify anything. But it was there, proof that last night's smirk had always been built on a maybe. I took the elevator back down to the street and walked 2 blocks to clear my head. The city looked the same with and without a ring. Traffic muttered, a dog dragged a man toward a park, someone laughed too loudly into a phone. Normal life went on, indifferent to personal earthquakes. I bought a cheap lamp and a better pillow on the way back. When I got in, I wrote 2 emails. One to her, a bullet point list covering my move, utilities, mail forwarding, a proposed schedule to divide furniture, and the contact info for my attorney. No venom or bait. One to my own parents. "I'm okay. I'll call tomorrow." Then I turned my phone face down and listened to the quiet do its work. Late, after midnight, a final message arrived from her. "I'm scared." I stared at those 2 words for a long time. That was the first honest sentence she'd given me in months. It deserved respect, not rescue. I typed, "I know." Then I put the phone away, because clarity isn't cruelty and boundaries aren't punishments. The tears were hers to walk through, the clarity mine to keep. I fell asleep in a room I'd chosen, on a bed I'd bought, with a future I wasn't outsourcing to someone else's mood. Tomorrow would be paperwork and logistics, and a meeting with a lawyer who doesn't care how good I used to be at apologizing. It would be coffee in a mug no one could throw away, and a key that fit only one lock. The first morning in the new place didn't feel like freedom fireworks. It felt like level ground. I woke before the alarm, no weight on my chest, just the quiet of a room that didn't expect anything from me. I made coffee in a cheap kettle, rinsed the cup, and tightened a loose screw on the cabinet hinge because it squeaked and I didn't want it to. Small fixes, no speeches. Paperwork came easy once I decided I wouldn't use it to fight. The attorney was efficient, a woman with steel in her spine and mercy in her voice. We put numbers to things that had been feelings: equity, accounts, the truck in my name, the furniture that mattered to her more than it did to me. Mortgage, I'd cover 60 days, then escrow and divide. Utilities, split to end of month, then separate. Streaming, cloud storage, joint memberships, closed, with duplicate files archived and sent. She nodded as I spoke, tapping notes, occasionally looking up to confirm I understood that fair still needed boundaries. I did. Friends did what friends do. A couple of guys reached out with bourbon and the offer to help move the heavy things, because that's how men say we see you. One of her friends, someone who'd laughed at her "choose yourself" captions, sent me a message I didn't answer. For what it's worth, I didn't agree with how she handled you. Noted. The neighbor at the old place texted that she'd seen him in the driveway one night, then not again. She kept reaching. The tone cycled: apology, anger, nostalgia, logistics dressed as intimacy. Do you remember the cabin in Gatlinburg? I found the photo from our first Christmas tree. You're really going to let lawyers decide our life? I answered only when it was necessary, and only in writing. Dates, times, lists. When she tried to pivot a calendar question into a memory, I pivoted it back. The spine you build at a job site is the same one you need when the sugar hits. Boundaries don't have to shout to hold. I changed my emergency contacts to my sister and my foreman. I updated my will. I moved my grandfather's watch from the drawer safe to the small black box in the closet at the new place, because I wanted it near the door I actually use. I set a weekly standing appointment with a trainer at the gym down the block. Nothing dramatic, just a time on the calendar where my legs remember they can carry me farther than the past. I bought a plant and watered it, then laughed out loud in an empty room because I had become the sort of man who buys a plant to prove to himself he's alive. It worked. We met once in a public place to exchange the last of the small things that don't fit into spreadsheets: photos, handwritten recipes, the ugly ceramic bowl from a trip that had been better than we let ourselves admit. She arrived polished, and when she saw I hadn't softened, a hairline crack ran through the gloss. She tried one more version of the speech. We could try again. Counseling. Rules. We can sleep separately for a while. Ease in. I thanked her for the clarity and said I was done with arrangements that make men roommates. She called me proud like it was a sin and not a skeleton. Closing accounts felt cleaner than I expected. I signed my name more times in 2 weeks than I had in years. The ring stayed where I'd left it on the dresser at the old house. She asked if I wanted it back for closure. I said closure isn't a keepsake. The final utility notice came addressed to both of us, and I paid it without commentary because pettiness is heavy, and I don't carry what I don't need. There were nights when silence felt too wide, when the cheap lamp cast hard edges and the rug didn't quite sit flat near the corner. I'd think about how we used to fit, about the sound she made when she fell asleep before me, about the way we used to bump into each other in the kitchen on purpose. I let the reel play and then turned it off like any other show that had run too many seasons. On a Saturday, I drove past the old neighborhood on my way to the supply store. The lawn was trimmed, blinds open, everything exactly fine. I didn't slow down. At the store, I bought a better level and a box of screws that won't strip, because some things you can improve simply by choosing better material. The guy at the register asked if I wanted a bag. I said no. I wanted the weight in my hands. The decree came through faster than I'd prepared for, less dramatic than television would like. Signatures, stamps, dates. My attorney called and said, "You're done." I said, "Good," and meant it. I forwarded the final documents with a 2-sentence note. "I wish you well. Please confirm receipt." She replied with, "I never wanted this," and a heart she probably didn't mean to add. Once, that would have been a trapdoor. Now it was punctuation in a language I no longer spoke. Weeks later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned she was moving to a smaller place closer to her friends. "Fresh start," he said, and watched my face the way people do when they think they're delivering a news bullet. I nodded, thanked him, and asked if the store still carried the good chisels. On the way home, I waited for the anger or relief or grief to crest. Nothing rose. There's a word for that isn't numb. It's finished. I don't have a grand lesson. I have a chair that doesn't wobble because I tightened it. I have a key that turns in one lock. I have a calendar that tells the truth. Most nights I sleep before midnight and wake to an alarm I don't snooze. Some evenings I sit on the small balcony and listen to the city saying nothing important. It's the best conversation I've had in a long time. She still texts sometimes, birthdays on the horizon, a holiday, a song she thinks I'd like. I read them all, answer none. I don't hate her. I wish her precisely what I wrote. Well, but elsewhere. Respect isn't a tactic. It's the ground everything stands on or sinks through. We ignored that long enough to learn it the hard way. She reached for power with a smirk and lost the thing that mattered. I reached for a doorknob and found mine. I stopped negotiating with gravity. And when people ask how it ended, I tell them the truth in 2 clean lines. I asked a question she wouldn't answer. I walked.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.